Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Curriculum. I'm Dr. Danny, and today we'll be talking about how do you answer the question, what do I want to be known for? I can say I taught science to high school students for 11 years. After I was a high school teacher, I became an education researcher. So I started researching, what are the strategies that help. So in the previous episodes, we talked a lot about networking. We started talking about networking in the sense of, do you have a plan when you are going to networking events? What is your strategy to make sure that you get the most out of those networking events? And then we talked about what's the difference between networking and community. Really focusing in on networking being an opportunity for access. How do you get access to opportunities? How do you get access to different rooms? And that access is determined by how diverse your network is. So you can have different networks to reach professional goals, and you may have different networks to reach personal goals. But both of those networks, or many different networks that you have, they need to be very diverse so that you can have access to a diverse set of experiences and a diverse set of opportunities. In this episode, I really want to hone in on, why are you networking? What are you going to provide to each of those networks, each of those relationships? What are you saying about who you want to be and what you want to be known for in order to help add, value to those networks? I know a lot of people say, what do you bring to the table? Why are you at the table is a better question. What is it about you that is going to add value and make people want to invest with you? So this is an important question because I work with a lot of early career researchers who are trying to build their research agenda. They're trying to build their profile. They're trying to build their reputation in the research community. And a lot of times they talk about, not being able to say no to certain opportunities, not knowing when to say no or how to say no to opportunities. And they may be dragged off of their mission because they're not saying no to things. And in order to know when to say no, you have to know, what do you want to be known for? You have to know the answer to that question. That's also important when I'm working with small businesses or when I'm working with, community service organizations. When they're asking for funding, when they're asking for donations, when they're asking for grant funding, they want me to support them and get in funds in order to support and move their mission forward. But the question I'm always asking is, what do you want to be known for? Do you have the materials ready to show a funder like, hey, you should invest in me because this is the type of work that I'm doing and this is the evidence that my work is having an impact or being effective, right? So in this episode, I'm going to help you answer that question of, what do you want to be known for? And I'm going to do that in a very old school way. I'm going to use some old school techniques. I'm drawing from strategies from elementary school. So when we used to have to read articles in elementary school, we had to review those articles. And the structure that the teacher used to give us was, you had to answer these questions about an article: who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how, right? So I'm going to help you think about, what do you want to be known for, by walking through who I am and what I want to be known for. And hopefully that can help you think about what you want to be known for. So I'll start out with the who. So, of course, I'm Dr. Danny. And when I think about who I am, I think about myself as an educator. I spent 10 years teaching biology to high school students. I taught other subjects, so I guess I can say I taught science to high school students for 11 years. After I was a high school teacher, I became an education researcher. So I started researching, what are the strategies that help specifically black students become successful in different STEM fields. So whether it's in biology or computer science. I also, as part of my research agenda, I also started trying to understand, how to broaden participation for underrepresented groups getting access to funding specifically from the National Science Foundation. So through my work as a resource center lead, I was also trying to understand what are the factors, what are the hidden things, hidden curriculum that underrepresented groups or researchers from underrepresented universities or those who have not gotten as much funding from the National Science Foundation, what do they need to be successful? And understanding what they need to be successful, I'm putting my educator hat back on and I'm saying, okay, now I understand based on my conversations, based on my research, based on my work, what they need to be successful, and I'm going to teach it to you. So I am an educator. That's who I am, right? So, of course, I play many roles. I hold many different positions. I'm also the president of Align Consulting Partners, which is my small business in which I help small businesses and community service organizations get grants and contracts to support their mission, get funded in their mission. As part of that role, again, I'm educating them on how to sell themselves so that people want to invest in them. And part of that is sharing who you are. So for both teachers, for both students, for researchers, for all the different types of networks that I am in, my role is I am an educator. So in order to get people to invest in you, whether you're trying to build relationships with them, whether those are like transactional relationships through networking, you're trying to be in community with them and have long-standing partnerships and relationships with them, the key here is that you really need to be clear about what your mission is, who you are, right? Who are you? Next, I would say, what is my why? So, of course, I told you I'm an educator. I want to specifically help Black people, whether it's children or adults, get into spaces that they don't usually have access to. And my field is usually those STEM education spaces where they may have access, but once they get in there, it's a very chilly environment, uncomfortable environment. So my why is really trying to encourage Black people, motivate them, show them that you belong in all rooms. I don't care what type of room you're trying to get into. I think that you belong in all of these rooms. And I understand that we face so many barriers in these spaces. So specifically, I'm going to talk about the barriers that we face when we're in STEM spaces, whether that's in education or research. So I'll give you a couple of examples from my own experience, right? So I was a high school biology teacher for 11-ish years. I taught high school biology in the inner school district. And one of the things that my grandmother in particular, but my family used to say, like, oh, why are you teaching in the city? You could teach anywhere. You could teach private. You could teach in the county where it's less problems, more resources, etc. But I've always wanted to teach people who were like me. I'm from the hood. I always wanted to make sure that we had opportunities because I don't think being from the hood is your sole identity. We are smart. We are creative. We can do anything that we want to do. So I feel strong about that. So I always wanted to teach in a district with students who look like me and had some of the same experiences like me. So when I was teaching high school biology, one of the years that I was teaching, I think I told you in another episode, I always had really high passing rates on the state biology assessment. So I taught a tested subject in which students had to pass the biology assessment in order to graduate from high school. That was one of a few other assessments that they had to take. My students always did really, really well on those assessments. No shade to other teachers, but I'm an educator. I know what I'm doing. I was able to connect science to their real lives and to their real experiences. But there were other aspects of the school, like, many inner city districts, there's a lot of problems. First, there's a lack of resources, a lack of support for both students and for teachers and administrators. There's a whole host of problems. I'm only focusing on my particular problem, which was getting those students to pass that biology assessment. And so one year the school hired outside organization to come in and teach us how to teach our students. These people that came in, they didn't look like our students. They weren't from the area that our students were from. They weren't even from Maryland. Not alone, they weren't from Baltimore. So they didn't even know the issues that we face. And they came in like many people that come into a school district wanting to give us the magic thing that was going to turn our school around. They didn't value what we were already doing. They didn't even ask questions about that. So when they came in, they had a meeting with the science teachers, and they were like, oh, we're going to teach you how to make a good unit, because they thought that if we made stronger units, then we would have higher success rates for students passing that biology assessment. At that time, I was in a master's program, and our professor was one of the courses I was taking. That was her whole mission, was to teach us how to make a really strong unit. And so I told him, like, that's not really something that I want to focus on, because I already know how to make a really strong science unit, because I was in this really good, science education master's program at the time. And like I said, I had a really good professor. And the feedback that I got from those, like, professional development providers, and I'm saying it in quotes, but they were actually professional development providers, so I don't need the quotations, was that I didn't care about my students. So they told me that I didn't care about my students after I've been working in this school district for many years, being pretty successful in getting students to achieve the goal that they thought was the important goal to achieve. And I was just like, oh, okay, whatever, because I know who I am. I'm very confident in who I am. I know, what my ability is, because not only do I feel it, I have evidence to support that. So that year, they told me that I didn't care about my students. Mind you, I was the one going to all the outside activities, showing up for students, even outside of the classroom. They would come to me after school and talk to me about things going on in their lives. And I supported them in so many different ways, as so many teachers, really do when we care about our students. Long story short, at the end of the year, at the beginning of the following year, we were reviewing our testing results for the high school assessment in biology, and 80% of my students passed the high school assessment. So I didn't participate in their professional development on writing a unit that I already knew how to write, that I was already doing well in. I heard the feedback that I didn't care about my students, but I had the highest pass rate of my school in particular for the high school assessment. Every single student who attended my class 4 or 5 times a week passed the assessment. And I taught students whose their first language was not English. So I was like, oh, okay. I don't care about my students, but yet here I am another year having the highest pass rate. And not just the highest pass rate, I think it was over 83% of my students passed the high school assessment that year. Another thing that happened to me when I was a teacher is the school was trying to adopt a book that they wanted all the students to read. That was their literacy strategy, to get students interested in reading. And so we had to suggest some of the different types of books that we wanted students to read. So one of the books that I suggested was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So I suggested that book because it talked about science in a real life way. It was about a Black woman who actually lived in Baltimore, where my students also lived. The issue took place in Johns Hopkins University, in which my students were familiar, because that's a very, it's a popular hospital probably globally, but it's a really popular hospital in Baltimore specifically. And I was like, oh, I think this is a good book for students to read. So the woman who was a literacy, I think, department chair at the time was like, oh, I don't think people would be interested in that book. And I was like, okay, like no problem. Like they chose another set of books, which was fine. But in my class, I still had my students read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I drew from my network, so I learned about that book from a professional development that I went to at the University of Maryland. So I drew from those connections, like, hey, I'm having my students read this book. Are there any other resources, anything that you could provide to kind of help support me in, making the connections between what was being talked about in the book and my students' real lives. So they invited me actually to a luncheon. And at the luncheon, I met Henrietta Lacks' son and another member of her family. And like I told you, I try to get the most out of all of the networking events that I'm going to. And so I was at that event. I met her son. After the event, I went up to him and I said, hey, I'm getting my students to read this book. It would be really great if you would come in and talk to my students about the impact, this story has had on your family, in particular. So if you don't know the story of Henrietta Lacks, she was a black woman in Baltimore who had cancer, and doctors at Johns Hopkins University used her cells in order to solve many, many different medical diseases like polio. They sent her cells to the moon. They found cures for other things using her cells without her permission. And without any compensation for her family. So when you go to the doctor now, there's an informed consent form. So anytime you get surgery, you sign a form that basically says they could use your cells for medical research and other things. I have issue with that form because if you opt out, I'm always like, will they do the surgery or will they, do something negative during the surgery? But anyway, long story short, these companies made tons of money. Johns Hopkins, other research companies made tons of money using her cells because they found that her cells were immortal. They just continue to replicate, which is one of the reasons why her cancer replicated so rapidly and she passed away. That's one reason, right? So I asked him to come in to talk to my students about it. We did a whole unit on Henrietta Lacks and how, the connection between the medical community and the research communities, and how they benefited off of, black people's bodies and did not share that wealth with them. And once I shared throughout the school, like, oh, I'm having her son come in, and he said, okay, I'll bring my granddaughter as well. We created a whole Henrietta Lacks symposium around that. They were some other administrators at the school was like, oh, we need to make this a school-wide event. They wanted to invite multiple people to the event. They made it a whole big deal. Mind you, when I, said that this would be a good book for the school to read, because all of the students had to take biology in order to graduate, the literacy department chair told me that people would not be interested in it. But long story short, they were interested in it. We made it a whole school-wide event. My students did a number of presentations. Henrietta Lacks' son and granddaughter attended the presentation. There was a whole big to-do around it. My students found so much value in it. They learned so much about it. And they were able to connect what they were doing in the classroom to their real lives, not only their real lives, but in their community, because they lived in Baltimore. They went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, or they knew people who went to Johns Hopkins Hospital. And in addition, that book, because of the symposium that I led, became a required reading for all 12th graders in that school district. So I'm saying this to say that we as black people, we are always facing so many barriers, whether they're microaggressions. So in research, we call them microaggressions. They might be macroaggressions. We could call it straight up racism, but it's not always just, racism. But there's always people that's doubting our abilities. Like, oh, if you are an educator, you can only teach 12th grade students or 11th grade students. You don't know what it's like to teach adult students. And yes, there are nuances between teaching different types of communities, but there's a lot of things, a lot of strategies, which I'm trying to share here that can, transfer from teaching high school to teaching adults, whether they're in college or teaching researchers. So my why is really about making sure that Black people feel confident in our abilities to provide different services, whatever that service is. Because I know, firsthand that we face so many barriers, and like people doubting what we can do, people not understanding that some of these skills are transferable, and those barriers are not always just at work, right? There are friends not supporting the things that we know. They don't have the same vision that we may have. They don't think that it might be successful, but it's important for us to feel confident and to continue to push forward, in the things that we know that we are capable of doing. And that is especially important when you have a business. It's especially important when you are trying to network with people, because you want to understand, like, all right, this is who I am, right? This is what I want to do. This is what I want to be known for. And this is why I am doing the work that I'm doing. So that is just a few of the questions that you need to be answering when you're trying to make connections, whether those are transactional connections, or you're trying to make long-standing connections, or you're just trying to get funding in order to support the business that you have. All right, so now I'm going to talk about how. So I already told you that I'm an educator. I specifically want to educate Black people around how they can be successful in reaching their goals. I told you my why, which is I want to make sure that Black people are always feeling confident and that they are developing strategies in order to be successful when they face barriers, because I know that we will face barriers. And then how. So how do I, ensure that the people that I work with, whether that's, on my job, in my business, or whether it's people that I interact with, or even through this podcast, how do I make sure, that my purpose, my mission is being forwarded? And that is by sharing, my expertise as I'm learning strategies that help other folks be successful, that I'm sharing those strategies with other people as well. So I'm not just using those strategies for my own benefit and saying like, okay, yes, I can be successful if I'm doing these strategies. So I've been at my job currently for 10 years. In those 10 years, I've been promoted twice. When I was a teacher for 11 years. In that 11 years, I also held multiple higher positions, right? But I'm also a person that is going to also pull up others as I climb, and I'm hoping that you would do that as well. So that is really the purpose of me starting this podcast, is I want to share strategies that's going to help you be successful. That's also, how I approach the resource centers that I lead. So I manage a $9 million, probably it's about $9 million research portfolio. And a major part of that portfolio is leading or co-leading resource centers for early career researchers who are interested in getting grant funding. And so my role is to share the strategies, what we call them in my area of expertise is really like the hidden curriculum. So what are the strategies that folks that are being successful are using in order to be successful that sound easy, like, oh, talk to a program officer, serve on a review committee. So if you're trying to get a grant, you can serve on review panels to see, what are the types of conversations that folks are having on these panels? What are the things that's moving forward? What are the things that's, getting stopped even before they get to the panel? So those are some of the strategies that folks use in order to be successful in grant writing. And so as I'm learning these things, I want to share these things with you, because some of these skills are transferable. Like I said, I work with STEM education researchers, but for Align Consulting Partners, I'm working with small businesses. They don't have to be STEM education researchers, but some of those strategies that's important are around like how to sell who you are, how to write a strong grant that people will want to invest in you. Because when you're asking for funding, you're really asking for people to invest in you. In order to do that, they need to know who you are. So that is my how. So where and when, right? So I did who, I did what, why, how, and I'm talking about when and where. So I really advocate for people in spaces that they are not in. I'm always speaking up for people, whether it is, hierarchical, saying like, oh, early career researchers, people often say some of the barriers that they face is like, oh, they're new to this space, so they don't really know X, Y, and Z. But I really try to bring out and advocate for people like, oh, they may not know that, but they are really skilled in this research methodology. Or they may not know how to write a grant that highlights the things that they're really strong in, but that's something that we can teach them. And a lot of people, keep people out of different rooms for a number of different reasons. And so when I'm in those rooms, I am advocating for those people. I'm speaking up for those people like, oh, don't think just because they don't have a doctorate degree, they don't know, what is helpful for other folks in different spaces. And so that's what I really want to encourage you all to do. So if you are trying to get funding, if you're trying to develop a business, if you're trying to, just be successful in your career in any of these different spaces, I really want you to think about, what do you want to be known for, right? What is it that you want people to know you for? What is the value you are adding to the spaces that you are in, whether those are networking spaces or whether those are community spaces, and how are you doing the work that you want to do? And I'm really talking about this because, one, when I'm talking to early career researchers, like I said, they have a hard time saying no to things that are outside of what they want to be known for. And if you are not strong in who you are as a person, who you want to be, people will help you be what they need you to be for their own success. They will guide you on a path that will help them look good or help them accomplish their goals. And I want you to think about what goals you are trying to accomplish and who do you need to know, what spaces do you need access to in order to accomplish those goals. And so when I was also working with small businesses or nonprofit organizations, and they wanted me to help them write a grant, for example, and I'm like, okay, well, tell me, what's your mission? What is the evidence that your work has been successful or had an impact? And it doesn't have to be strong, rigorous research evidence that I would expect when I'm working with researchers, but what is the data that you have? Are you having students complete surveys? Are you having participants, because they don't have to be students, are you having participants complete surveys after they participate in your survey? Are you collecting attendance data? What kind of data are you collecting to show that you are having an impact? If you're selling a product, are you making money, right? Because we could be selling a product and the product could be looking good and a lot of celebrities could be wearing the product, but you aren't making any money. So if your goal is to sell this product and you're not making money, you're still not reaching your goal, right? So maybe you have a network of folks that are okay with you, okay with wearing your product or advertising your product, but if it's not making money, you're not reaching your goal. And so again, that's why I'm talking to you about being very clear about who you are and what you want to be known for, and in your strategy for reaching that particular goal, whether it's in STEM education or otherwise, should be tied to that mission. It should be tied to your vision. And when you reach or hit barriers, which I know you will, like we all do, I want you to be able to say, like, I'm confident in this. I'm going to continue to move forward. I'm going to fight for what I think is important. So whether people say, oh, you don't care about your students or not, it's like, okay, you can believe that I don't care about my students, but I'm going to show you what caring about my students does and what the outcomes are. So that is the purpose of this podcast when I'm talking about the corporate curriculum, is really to share those strategies that we use in corporate America. I've used in other spaces. I feel like those skills are transferable in order for you to be successful at whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So thank you for joining me. I hope that this episode is important to you. If you want to learn more strategies around how to be successful in corporate America and reaching your goals, please follow, subscribe, like, comment on my YouTube channel at Align Consulting Partners. I also have an Instagram at Align_consulting_partners, where I share strategies and tips for building your profile, for helping you make career, strides in your career, to build your career, whether it's entrepreneurial or in corporate America. And, I'm Dr. Danny. So let me teach you the things that I know to help you be successful. Thank you.